A Josie father with strong ties to Stellenbosch, described as an incorruptible man who tried to make South Africa a better place. And despite the risks associated with such high-profile cases, insolvency attorney Bouwer van Niekerk remained resolute. Now police are searching for the hitman who took his life.
Corner of Avonwold Road and Jan Smuts Street in Saxonwold. It's a very, very busy road, lots of cars driving past, so just imagine the noise of the traffic just shush, shush, shush constantly. And Bouwer arrives at work, normal time, having dropped his child off at school. And he's got a meeting scheduled for 10 a.m. The men arrive at around 20 past 10. And when we're still trying to nail down those exact details, they're in the boardroom. Bouwer walks in, introduces himself. A bit of a conversation ensues. And at one point, one or both of these men pull out firearms that they had concealed on their persons, and they shoot Bouwer. I understand that Bouwer was shot in the head, unfortunately, and died at the scene.
We get an understanding of the complex case Bouwer was embroiled in at the time of his murder from investigative journalist Kyle Cowan next.
Got something to say about this topic? Drop us a short voice note on the Leeds WhatsApp hotline. That's 072 562 3179.
Thanks so much for tuning into The Lead. Now in episode 101, listened to around 600,000 times. If you'd like, you can rate us 5 stars. Hit follow, like, and subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. That's to be reminded of our next episode. My name's Graeme Raubenheimer. This is The Lead. This is the South African story. Moving to our top story in this edition of The Lead. Well, the hit on a top Johannesburg insolvency lawyer's life has reverberated throughout the country's legal fraternity. Now, while police are attempting to arrest the gunman who so brazenly snuffed out Bouwer van Niekerk's life last Friday, details are beginning to emerge about the multi-million-rand cryptocurrency trading fund that he was engaged with at the time. Kyle Cowan, he's our senior investigative journalist, he's piecing this elaborate puzzle together for us. He's live in our Johannesburg studios now. Kyle, what a story. Thanks so much for returning to The Lead.
Thank you for having me, Graeme. It's always a pleasure when you invite me.
Fantastic. Look, there's been so much said since Friday. Can you believe it that we're dealing with yet another targeted killing making headlines in this country? It really feels like South Africa is heading towards a Mexico esque sort of situation. Let's begin here. Who exactly was Bouwer van Niekerk? He's been described in the aftermath of his death as somebody who is, incorruptible, as it's been said. And what do insolvency lawyers do exactly?
Yeah, so Bouwer was relatively well known in the insolvency space, which is quite a small sort of niche part of the legal sector. They deal, a lot of these people know each other. They deal with each other all the time on different matters, etc. And as an insolvency attorney, he would be dealing with legal matters around liquidations of companies, sequestrations of individuals, business rescue proceedings. It is really quite a specialized field. There's a lot of misunderstanding about it, and there's also inevitably, depending on how much money is involved in these companies and these things, there is a lot of litigation around it. So they quite often get quite a bad rap, the attorneys and the insolvency practitioners, because there's this perception out there that they're all working together to try and enrich themselves, etc. And Bouwer was, in my interactions with him in the past, it was related to the business rescue of all the Gupta-related companies, particularly around the Optimum coal mine, the massive coal mine in Mpumalanga.
Because he's well known, right? He's well known. He's been in the media quite a few times before.
Yeah. He really rose to prominence as a result of that work. So in these insolvency proceedings, there's obviously a lot of media interest, particularly around the Guptas at that time. I mean, it was an absolute circus. We were, I think journalists were fighting at the door sometimes to try and speak to these guys. And it was because there's so much money on the line. And it represented at that point, while the commissions were ongoing and, people were still trying to figure out exactly what to do about the Gupta family, the business rescue process represented very real potential consequences for, the assets of these companies that had been involved in subverting our state into enriching themselves. It was a massive story. Still is a massive story. We just unfortunately don't devote as much time to it as we used to. And Bouwer really rose to prominence in that because the BRPs, the business rescue practitioners, and Bouwer were involved in just an absolute onslaught of litigation against the Gupta family and their proxies around these companies. These companies held all their houses in Saxonwold, the mine, etc. All of those assets were vested in those companies. And I remember at one point a couple of years ago, I actually wrote a story about the fact that Bouwer and the BRPs were involved in something like 36 concurrent high court cases involving, this whole business rescue process. And that's really where that very strong impression of Bouwer as being like a sort of no-nonsense, sort of tough guy lawyer who really stuck it to this family, the state capture family, the Guptas, at this really critical moment in our recent history. And rightfully so. We may have had, I'm quite an opinionated person, and I may have had my disagreements with him around certain things and not pushing hard enough on certain points and so on. But at the end of the day, he stood up alongside the business rescue practitioners, and all the creditors will tell you they didn't do this right or they didn't do that right, but they fought the fight. And as far as I'm concerned, I have never seen any evidence that, Bouwer or any of the other business rescue guys did anything that was untoward or wrong, even though there may be differences of opinion in, are you pursuing these people hard enough? And the question really then becomes, how hard do you push something until the law says, okay, you've done enough?
Kyle, you're quite an expert, in my opinion. See, I'm also opinionated about putting the timeline of events together for murders or crimes. You're really good at this, and I love it. It's one of my favorite things about journalism or looking back in history. Take us to the crime scene in the heart of our plush Johannesburg suburbs on Friday at the Smith Sue Attorney and Conveyances offices. That's where we find Bouwer at the time. Yeah, he's expecting this planned meeting. Take us through what we understand on record thus far about the murder happening, and what time did it happen?
Yeah, so corner of Avonwold Road and Jan Smuts Street in Saxonwold. It's a very, very busy road, lots of cars driving past. So just imagine the noise of the traffic just shush, shush, shush constantly. And Bouwer arrives at work, normal time, having dropped his child off at school, and he's got a meeting scheduled for 10 a.m. The men arrive at around 10:15, and when we're still trying to nail down those exact details, the men had arrived on time for the meeting. They're in the boardroom. Bouwer walks in, introduces himself. A bit of a conversation ensues, and at one point, one or both of these men pull out firearms that they had concealed on their persons, and they shoot Bouwer. I understand that Bouwer was shot in the head, unfortunately, and died at the scene. And coming back to, this is what's important about these timelines, is that you can start to piece together the series of events, and one thing leads to the other. And the very critical thing about the presence of these men there that day is that they had made an appointment to see him. They were there to discuss potentially a new case. So it would have been like a normal day for an attorney. There wouldn't have been any sort of indication that something like this was going to happen, that something this serious was going to happen, 10 o'clock in the morning on a Friday.
Because, from any sort of person listening or reading the stories, they might think, didn't the security guards at the front gate of an obviously potentially sort of like hot button property, did they not, check those coming in or whatever the case may be? But I mean, it was a planned meeting. Bouwer didn't have any reason to believe, as we understand it, his alarm bells weren't necessarily going off, right?
No, otherwise he wouldn't have taken the meeting. And unless, we're not 100% sure yet what he was told the meeting was about. Unless it was about something very serious. Maybe he was told that, we have information for you that's critical to another matter that you're working on, or, attorneys make money by taking on new clients. That's how it works. And, any attorney who gets phoned and says, look, I've got a major problem here that I need your help with, you at the very least take the initial meeting to see if, there's anything there that you can help these individuals with. And, it's quite easy. There is access control at the gates. There are cameras there. There are security guards stationed there, as far as I know, 24/7. But again, as you said, the meeting was prearranged. They arrived. They probably had to fill in a register or have their driver's license scanned. Quite easy to, have someone else's driver's license with you or write a fake name in the register. No one is at that moment going to interrogate your identity because you have, a legitimate purpose to be there.
3 people that was in one GWM vehicle. Is that right, Kyle?
So the reports are a little bit sketchy at this point. We understand from the police, however, 4 individuals in the GWM vehicle. Only 2 of them actually left the car and went inside the offices. Yeah.
Okay. But importantly, in the run-up to this event, and of course, Bouwer might have had his alarm bells ringing maybe in the deep recessions of his mind, or perhaps he was used to receiving, threats in the past. That's mere speculation. But he did indeed receive an ominous phone call on Sunday, the 31st of August. Who does he receive this phone call? What do we understand about this phone call?
So we don't know who the person is who spoke to Bouwer van Niekerk and to Kurt Knoop on the same day within minutes of each other. We know that it was an Afrikaans woman, and the message that was imparted to both Bouwer and Kurt was very, very simple. Resign from this particular case, or you will not see the end of the week. Those are the words that Bouwer recalled later to a friend of his being said to him. And the message to Mr. Knoop was exactly the same. You need to resign, or, by the end of the week, something bad's going to happen to you. And that would then lead you to the inevitable question. But if you'd received this threat on the Sunday, why are you taking a meeting on a Friday, just days later, with people who you don't know? And that comes back to, what we touched on a little bit right at the beginning. The insolvency space is extremely fraught. There's always conflict. There's always allegations. There's always mudslinging. Having your company that you built up from nothing go through an insolvency thing, whether it be a business rescue or a liquidation, it's an extremely uncomfortable process. Your assets are being taken away in front of you. Your company is being ripped apart in front of you by people who you don't know and probably don't trust. And it is a process that gives rise to strong emotions very quickly. And only the most professional business rescue practitioners or liquidators are able to manage that process, while at the same time, they have to fulfill a legal duty to find criminality or wrongdoing or to save the company. And at the same time, they have to manage it in such a way. It's very difficult. It's a very, very difficult thing. And only the very most experienced guys or women get it right to manage that without any animosity. There will always be anger, and it's about managing it in a way, that you can feel. The phone call, however, to my mind, would have or should have put Bouwer on guard. It should have been an immediate red flag. I would not have been accepting a meeting that week with new clients or potential new clients. But again, we're not sure why he did take this meeting.
Right. And of course, we can't claim to know what was going through Bouwer's mind or the rationale that he was using at the time until we, perhaps speak to close family members or relatives who might have more knowledge of that, just to caveat that. Let's go to the heart of one of the central cases that Bouwer was acting with Mr. Knoop in this particular case. And there was this NTC Global Trade Fund that was essentially put under business rescue. So the NPA, and help me out here, Carl, had this case lodged against this global trade fund. And essentially it's a cryptocurrency scheme of sorts, and the NPA tried and failed essentially to get it labeled as a Ponzi scheme or to unearth that it is thus. Here comes Bouwer and Knoop. They're just doing their sort of jobs. They're trying to follow the letter of the law, and they essentially get to a point where the case fails, and they unfreeze the funds. Take us through a little bit of how this sort of case unravels. Tell us a little bit more about who this particular fund is and why it was such a difficult issue for Bouwer to be involved in.
Yeah, so NTC Global Trade Fund is the name of a company, but it is also how the name that we are using to describe an interrelated set of companies that were involved in what is called cryptocurrency arbitrage trading. So it's an automated platform that looks at cryptocurrency exchanges, and if there's an Ethereum coin or a Bitcoin, and one exchange is selling it at slightly lower price to another exchange. It would buy at the lower price, sell at the higher price in the other exchange, thereby generating instantaneous profit. I know that there are people screaming at their devices right now listening to that because it's a terrible explanation of what is actually a very complex thing. But that's how
very complex.
That's the best way that I can explain it to in how I understand it.
Well done.
NTC is something that was created by a local businessman, Thabo Letopa, and he marketed this as a more unique way of doing this. He has some intellectual property, an idea, a unique way of doing this that would generate more profits for people, etc. We don't need to get into all the details of how exactly that works because I don't think I understand it. But Mr. Letopa and his business partner, Mr. Marius Venter, sold this idea to people to say, we are doing this, you know about arbitrage trading. You can research it online, but we're going to do it in a special way, in a new way that's going to be better and generate you more money. At this point, I should add that Mr. Letopa has in court papers repeatedly said that, this is not a scam. This is real. This is not something that, this is not rainbows and unicorns. And he repeatedly points to the High Court finding that that NTC is not a Ponzi scheme as his evidence for that. So let's take that step back. In late 2023, there's an investigation ongoing by the NPA and the South African Reserve Bank because these cryptocurrency exchanges, they don't operate in South Africa only. They operate across borders. So there is South African money moving across borders, digital borders in that sense, and that's where the Reserve Bank got involved. We're not exactly sure why, but we understand that an anonymous call was put into the Reserve Bank about NTC, and at that point, the investigation started. The NPA then moves to get something called a preservation order. Now, as a result of the NPA filing those court documents to preserve the money that is in NTC's bank accounts and various other companies involved in this ecosystem, the NPA is asking the court to effectively give an order to the banks that says that money can't go anywhere. It has to stay right there while we figure out exactly what is going on here.
In a bid to, if I may add, as I understand it, in a bid to obviously protect investors' multi-millions here.
Correct. So the idea from the NPA is in preserving assets like this, and they would do this with cars, with houses, with money in bank accounts, etc. The idea is that we believe that there may be criminality here, or some or other law has been transgressed. We're not exactly sure yet exactly how. In this case, in NTC, they weren't exactly sure yet how, because this is a very complex system. But they're saying, we believe this money should be frozen. We'll figure this out. We'll do a proper investigation, and then we'll see where it all ends up. This is to protect not only the investors, but also to protect the states, to protect the government, because effectively, if they don't act, there could be negligence claims later. It's a whole legal quagmire. As a result of all of this, FNB stops the bank accounts. It says, you can't withdraw your money. Sorry, NTC, you need to go and sort this out with the NPA first. Now, because those bank accounts were frozen, creditors, i.e. the investors into NTC, were not then able to be paid their profit share on the trades or their 1% annual interest, etc. Their money was now sitting with NTC, being traded on this so-called platform, this cryptocurrency exchange platform, and they weren't able, so NTC wasn't then able to pay them the profits out. That's when things really started heating up. One person representing a group of these investors files a liquidation application to liquidate the company, but Thabo Letopa approaches Bouwer van Niekerk. Van Niekerk he's told, look, this guy, when it comes to companies and what's going on with companies and the Companies Act and all of this kind of stuff, this guy's your guy. He can sort this out. He can sort this whole problem out for you. And it's at that point that Bouwer gets involved with Letopa and NTC, and he starts advising the company on what to do. First of all, the first problem is to get rid of this preservation order, because that is effectively hampering the way that the business can operate. After that, when FNB then decides to close the bank accounts after its own internal decision-making, That is when Bouwer advises Latopa, let's put this company in business rescue, because business rescue achieves several things. It achieves, you can then get the business rescue practitioner to open a bank account that the company can use to continue to pay its creditors and continue to pay its bills. But at the same time, it also shields the company from further legal applications. That is where that process stands up until March of 2024. NTC then gets a new bank account through the business rescue practitioner, Kurt Knoop, but the fight carries on. The NPA then files an application to forfeit the preserved money. So the money is sitting in the bank account, it's preserved, no one can touch it. Now the NPA files a second application to say, right, we want to take this money away from NTC, put it in the state's criminal asset recovery account, then we're going to carry on with our criminal investigation. Van Niekerk actually helps Latopa and NTC to fight that forfeiture application. And in so doing, he is successful in helping Latopa and NTC not only stop the forfeiture order from happening, but also removing the preservation order. So effectively, the argument is the state has been unable to prove any criminality here. They're not even alleging X, Y, or Z. And it's in that order that it's found, oh, well, look, the state hasn't presented any evidence that this is a Ponzi scheme. It is at that moment that then the money can be unfrozen. F&B, however, has made the decision that we are no longer going to bank you as clients, so you need to find a separate bank account. The money is then moved out of these F&B accounts, and that's when the relationship between Latopa and Van Niekerk starts to fall apart.
You're listening to the latest edition of The Lead on News 24 with Graeme Raubenheimer. If you've got an opinion on what you've heard so far, drop us a short voice note on our WhatsApp hotline. That's 072-562-3179.
My name's Graeme Raubenheimer, in conversation with Kyle Cowan, our senior investigative journalist, about the hit on the life of the top Johannesburg insolvency lawyer, Bouwer van Niekerk. Let's continue the conversation now. Mr. Latopa's now he's accused Bouwer in previously filed court papers, sort of essentially stating that Bouwer was standing with his hands on the levers of the monies being disbursed back to the creditors or whatever the case may be. Take us through this next part of it, because from my mind's eye, it seems like there's sort of two sides of the creditors. There's one side that there's a group of companies or investors that are quite happy that, they managed to get to this point where the money could be unfrozen. And then there's another group of companies that were not as happy.
Yeah, I think that what we're dealing with here is a lot of smoke and mirrors. So it's exceptionally difficult for us to get behind, we're talking about events that happened many months ago and in some cases years ago. And we're also dealing with a situation where there are about 2,000 very angry people who want their money. And unfortunately, what happens in these situations is that little bits of information spread amongst these creditors, these people who are owed money, and they become truth or myth or even are accepted as a lie in some cases. And no one really then understands exactly, because every person is going to believe what they want to believe. But what our story today was about was an 11-page letter that Latopa sent out to these creditors. It was his first official communication to people who had invested within NTC in about, a year and a half. And in this letter, he makes several very critical allegations. He says, I've presented an idea to the business rescue practitioners on how I can get you your money. There's a simple solution to all of this. The solution isn't simple the way that he explains it, but he says the solution is simple. But critically, Kurt Knoop, the business rescue practitioner, and Bouwer van Niekerk, his attorney, are standing in my way of doing this. They are saying to me, no, you cannot do this. He doesn't say it in the letter, but in court papers, he does say that he believes that Mr. Latopa believes that the reason why they were fighting, Bouwer and Kurt were fighting to stay on his business rescue, to keep NTC within business rescue, was so that they could continue to earn fees, legal fees and business rescue fees in the case of Mr. Knoop. Now, there's no evidence of this. Business rescue is a legal statutory process. You can't just put a company in business rescue today because you're facing headwinds from the NPA and remove it tomorrow when things are going better.
Yeah, it's not a Band-Aid. It's not a plaster you can just pop on and pop off.
No. And from my understanding is that people tried to explain this to Mr. Latopa. Bouwer tried to explain this to him. Kurt Knoop tried to explain this to him. They even tried to explain it to him in affidavits when they eventually started litigating against one another. But it was a bone of contention. It remains a bone of contention. Mr. Latopa has filed a court case to remove the company from business rescue because, in his opinion, the NPA's preservation order and the forfeiture order not being successful means that the company can continue to trade, that everything is fine. That remains to be seen. Whether the court will agree with Mr. Latopa and lift it out of business rescue, we're waiting for the hearing date on that matter. It's something that we'll obviously be following very, very closely. But what we can say is that, and this is what our story today says, Mr. Latopa created the impression in the minds of thousands of creditors that Bouwer van Niekerk and Kurt Knoop were untrustworthy, that they were standing in the way of them, them getting paid their money because they refused to lift the business rescue off. And it is a strange situation where Bouwer was initially approached by Mr. Latopa and NTC. He then recommends Kurt Knoop, whom he worked with on the Optimum business rescue. And then they effectively, how Mr. Latopa sees it, turn on him. And this is where, Mr. Latopa accuses Bouwer of then abandoning him, shifting allegiances is the phrase that he uses, to then work with Kurt. And in Latopa's mind, there's this thing that is happening, that this business rescue practitioner and this attorney are trying to make money out of my company. They are trying to run this thing for 3 years and earn an estimated 4 million rand a month in business rescue fees. And I'm not up for that. I want my company back. I want it back up and running. I want everything normal because the business rescue process is no longer necessary. Now, this is where it starts to become very controversial and where people, especially creditors and investors, they believe this. And now there is a lot of anger directed towards Bouwer and Kurt Knoop. And I think what is getting lost in this process is that Mr. Latopa was the one who followed Van Niekerk's advice and placed the company under business rescue. Then once the business rescue process was ongoing, once that business rescue is registered with the Companies and Intellectual Properties Commission, you as the director, you as Mr. Latopa are effectively no longer in control of the company.
Sure.
And Bouwer van Niekerk, and we can debate the ethics of him, acting for the company first and then for the business rescue practitioner after. That's a debate that legal professionals need to have, whether that's allowed. I know that it has been done before. It's not something that's very strange. But in this sense, Van Niekerk's obligation in terms of the law is vesting with the company and the rescue thereof. And that's what we need to try and get across to people, that in my belief, yes, there are lots of rumors going around about how much money, who was paid what and the other, but we have to be sober about this and take a step back and understand that no matter how much money you accuse Bouwer van Niekerk of being paid to litigate against the MPA on your behalf as creditors, there's nothing in that whole process that allows a man to be shot. There are other ways to resolve these problems. And that's the bottom line.
100%. Yeah, I couldn't have put it any better. I look at it almost in the same light to a certain degree, and it's obviously a different context, but a criminal defense attorney being targeted for representing a certain client, right? There's certain risks, but they're also just doing their job to a certain degree, right? And there's no evidence to suggest in this particular case, as you say, and we'll obviously get more details as they come across, whether or not Bouwer was getting more money than what he was supposed to for the job that he had undertaken. Let's fill out some of the last sort of, because this is potentially turning into a documentary, which I'm sure it will. Okay. Kurt, he's been threatened as well, and he's withdrawn from this entire process as a business rescue practitioner. That's right?
That's correct. He's withdrawn and resigned, yes.
What does Mr. Latopa say at this stage about adding his voice to the media reports thus far? I think I saw in your latest piece, and you've already sort of alluded to it, intolerable, unprofessional NTCs. Latopa blamed Van Niekerk for investors not getting paid. Our top story this morning on News 24. He's basically also claiming that he feels his life is in danger, and at a certain point he'll come to you and give comment. Kyle, do I have that correctly?
Yes. So when we approached him, initially we tried to phone him obviously on Friday when shortly after Mr. Van Niekerk was shot, we tried to get into contact with Mr. Latopa over the weekend. he finally got back to me on Monday after I sent another email and said, well, look, my life is also in danger. But strangely, he says in the email that his life is now in danger because of an interview he gave to another newspaper, the Sunday Times. And in that interview, he says, look, there was no bad blood between me and Mr. van Niekerk. I'm also in hiding. My life is also under threat. And earlier today, there was a statement issued with him sort of saying, look, the Sunday Times thing has now caused the whole mess for me. My life is now in even more danger, so I'm definitely in hiding. But, we're continuing with the litigation process to get this company out of business rescue. And then we will, start paying creditors, etc. So at this point, I have not actually been able to speak to Mr. Latopa on the phone. He sort of promised to get back to us and answer our questions, because obviously we have many, many questions. But at this point, I'm hopeful that he will get in touch with us quite soon. I do understand that he's hired a media company who's now going to represent his interests in the media. So I'm hoping that quite soon we can start having conversations around meeting Mr. Latopa and trying to understand all of this.
Police, no arrests at this stage, but I understand there's a top unit on the case.
Yeah, very, very early days, so no arrests. I understand that there is a unit busy. The case is being handled by the Serious and Violent Crimes Unit of, the Gauteng Provincial Serious and Violent Crimes Unit under Brigadier Nama, who, to everything, to my knowledge and to everything that I know about this unit, they have some very experienced and very good investigators working in that unit. They tackle all sorts of things like cash in transit and murders and ATM bombings, etc. So people who know what they're doing, and I'm hoping that they have the right resources in place this time to move quickly.
And then lastly, at the end of it all, just to wrap up our conversation, I'm sure we're going to be chatting about this again in future. Undoubtedly, there's been many messages of mourning, tribute, support for Bouwer and his family, friends, the local lawyers community. I read one of the quotes in your piece, people now concerned, hey, do I continue this career as an insolvency lawyer? Do I go into business rescue? Could I potentially have a target on my back one day for also being embroiled in such complex matters in future?
Yeah, so lots of shock and outrage, because I think the way that the murder has been committed was also very shocking and brazen. I think that for any attorney, they are rightfully worried. That they have to meet clients to survive as a business, as that's what they do. And if they are now too scared to do that, I'll tell you what one very good insolvency attorney told me over the weekend is that their concern now is that people are starting to realize that there's a value proposition involved in all of these insolvency proceedings. You can spend millions of rands fighting the legal battle, trying to keep things going, or you can hire a hitman for a lot less than that and make someone like Bouwer van Niekerk go away. And anyone who knew Bouwer, anyone who's ever interacted with him professionally, knew that he was a bit of a bulldog on things and was, quite tenacious once he got stuck into something. And I think that's similar to when Clutter and Thomas Murray were killed. Attorneys in the insolvency space especially, but attorneys in general, investigators, auditors, considering the hits that have been taken out on Mpho Mafole, an auditor in Ekurhuleni, Babita Diokaran,
I was about to say.
A finance official in the Gauteng Department of Health. I think that this has a very real, tangible chilling effect. I think it has a chilling effect on us as investigative reporters. Do we pursue these stories? Do we, after Bouwer's shooting, it was the first time that I remember having a conversation with my colleagues to say, do we go down this road? And of course we said yes, because someone has to. But I think that we can't let this affect, and I know it's easier said than done, but we cannot let something like this affect the good work that is being done out there. We are speaking to people every day who are trying to stem the tide of corruption, of malfeasance, of wrongdoing. It is difficult, it is thankless, it is dangerous, but there are people out there trying. There are many people out there who are trying to get past those people, and we need to start, I think we really need to start having serious conversations about not only the prosecutions and investigations of these crimes, but systemic ways where, crimes of this nature are punished harshly so that people think twice about doing this.
And just a very brief note, let's hope that the Matlanga Commission of Inquiry can also shed a little bit more light on efforts to, stop, these hit squads from operating. What are there any real operations sort of going to the source of the nests of these criminals is sort of the question that I'm sort of sprung with at this time. Resign or die, chilling threat days before lawyer Bouwer van Niekerk's murder is one of our initial reports from the 6th of September. If you're looking for a more solid understanding in black and white text to understand the events as it first emerged, go back to that article on News 24. It's a fantastic read by our News 24 investigations team, piecing together the puzzle as we go. And then, of course, Kyle's piece that we've already alluded to, taking us further into this NTC deal as we know it. I'm sure this is not going to be the last time we'll be speaking about this particular case. Kyle, fantastic, sterling journalism as always. Stay safe and thanks for your time on The Lead.
Thank you, Graeme.
Listen Up is News 24's sharp new podcast, where hosts Tim Cowan and Mark Barnes cut through the clutter with bold takes and unfiltered insight.
They're not fighting for the good of South Africa. And so this is degenerated into a series of tit-for-tat spats. How's that for a bit of poetry early in the morning?
Smart, punchy, and unapologetically real.
President Ramaphosa has explained why he did it, and the reason he did it was because he said that people weren't allowed to go to America, and then Andrew Whitfield did, and then there's a dispute about whether or not he asked.
Catch new episodes of Listen Up every Tuesday on News 24 or wherever you get your podcasts.
I know a lot about this. Not really.
Yeah, there we go.
Here goes.
You can be the accused for a change. Yeah.
New episodes of The Lead air Monday through Thursday at 7 p.m.
Ending off with On This Day in History, the 9th of September 1985. At the time, US President Ronald Reagan had reversed his earlier stance on apartheid South Africa, agreeing to limited sanctions. During the late 1970s and early 1980s, the Ford, Carter and Reagan administrations had tried to influence South African governments by working with him discreetly in a strategy called quote-unquote constructive engagement. In so doing, it was hoped that the US would maintain some degree of influence in the coming political reforms in Southern Africa. And while it's been alleged that Reagan's indifference to human rights issues in this country are best explained by latent racism, it's more likely that Reagan, the last of the great Cold Warriors, was trying to contain global communism and what he sincerely believed to be the growing Soviet menace. Sadly, as far as Washington was concerned, the ANC's alliance with the South African Communist Party was reason enough to taint not only the ANC but all associated with the liberation struggle. Furthermore, if South Africa ever were to fall into the Soviet sphere, the US would risk losing access to gold, uranium, magnesium and other strategic metals. By the mid-1980s, world opinion and American public awareness of the situation in apartheid South Africa had forced Washington's hand. Many state governments and local municipalities had already begun to divest themselves of South African investments. So in September of 1985, Reagan announced limited sanctions on Pretoria. Banned by executive order were the exportation of computer technologies used by South African security forces, loans to the South African government, exports of nuclear goods or technology, and the importation of Krugerrands. Yet Congress would go even further. With the passage of the United States Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act, CAAA, over a presidential veto in 1986, the United States Congress established an elaborate sanction structure prohibiting future investments, bank loans, and some forms of trade with South Africa. This override of Reagan's veto was the first and only time that Congress was able to reverse the foreign policy of a sitting American president. That's courtesy of the South African History Online database, the 9th of September 1985. Anything on your mind for today's edition, send us a voice note to 072 562 3179. You can mail us, thelead@24.com. You can also hit like, follow and subscribe. That way, on our various platforms, you'll be notified of our next edition. My name's Graeme Raubenheimer, and so long as there's trusted news first, we'll have The Lead.